What's up, everybody? How are you doing? Time for another episode of Morning Combat Extra Credit. These are the fights from UFC 294, or big cards more generally, that we just don't have time for on regular MK or even our post-fight shows, but do matter, and we do want to discuss them. So do me a favor, subscribe, thumbs up on the whole video. Thank you guys so much for watching. So normally what I do with this is I give you kind of like my top 5 takeaways. I still have top 5 takeaways, but I have a lot more than that too. That whole prelim card from UFC 294 was kind of a disaster, right? I mean, it was a little bit weird. So there's a lot to get to. Let's just go top to bottom on that, or maybe bottom to top. But we're going to go through every fight, not in huge detail every time. I'm going to focus my attention on the ones that matter more. But there was something weird just basically about all of them. All right, without further ado, let's get to it. Now, it's not all bad and ugly. There is some good. We should talk about it. So we'll start actually top to bottom from the prelim card. Mohammad Mokaev defeats Tim Elliott via submission arm triangle at 3:03 of round 3. Mohammad Mokaev obviously is very young. He's a very interesting prospect. There's been things in his game that you might have liked. He's pretty good at wrestling. He has, I think, decent cardio, maybe even good, or at least there's a way in which it could get very good. Poise. There's a lot of things you liked. Moderately, respectably well-rounded, I think is maybe a better way to put it. More than moderately, respectably, I think is better. But still kind of green. There was a lot that he had to kind of get right. Tim Elliott is long in the tooth relative to what he was capable of some years ago, but still a very interesting test. And we'll talk about this more. Tim Elliott has openly talked about it. I'm not in any way casting shade by saying he has openly discussed, I'm going to grab gloves and cheat and do whatever I can. It's the ref's job to intervene. If they tell me to stop, I'll stop. But until then, I'm going to get some in. And just based on what happened in the rest of this card and what happens in MMA cards in general, where refs are very, disinclined from taking a point, I can't deal with that anymore, folks. I just can't deal with it. Take a point. Take a point. This idea where we don't want to introduce ourselves as referees into how the fight ultimately gets scored. Guys, you're doing that no matter what, right? Once you enter the cage with them, you're having an effect. By not calling for points being taken, you are artificially affecting the fight. You're not letting the natural fermentation process take place. Everything is a choice. Whether you intervene to take a point or whether you don't, you are affecting the outcome. You are affecting how it gets scored. You are affecting ultimately how the fight goes. Either way, either by directly taking a point or not, your choices are the ones that affect how it turns out. So this idea that if we just let it play out and we don't take a point, we're letting the appropriate natural forces take place. And in certain cases, that can be true. But here's a case, and some other ones we'll get to, where that's just not really appropriate. Where this kind of reserved attitude to let a more natural process unfold. There is no natural process. Nothing about this is natural. If you don't take a point, you are deciding to essentially intervene in that way. I'm actually not going to do the thing that probably is justified in this case, and as a consequence, that's going to affect the potential outcome. Now, there was some illegal behavior from Tim Elliott, including kneeing a downed opponent. It ultimately didn't really affect Mokaev. Obviously, he got the win, and he got the win via stoppage. But sort of something to pay attention to here and how weird this fight went. And listen, Mokaev struggled a little bit at times to get his game going, but the switch he hit, or not the switch, the peek out that he hit was absolutely tremendous. And more to the point, ultimately, the thing that had been lacking from him was appropriate urgency. He had good wrestling, he had good mat returns, but, kind of passing, moving to mount, threatening, a little more ground and pound. The ground and pound's been a real big issue. A little bit better this time. Didn't go as far as I wanted it to, but certainly better, I think. And in the end, gets the submission over a very crafty vet in the 3rd round. This is the best performance I've seen from him yet. To win would have been good. To finish a guy as good and as experienced as Tim Elliott, especially given he's unorthodox, he's big for the weight class, right? Remember how big he was when he went up against Demetrius Johnson? So what Mokaev showed me was there's a little bit more offensive urgency adding to some of that very nice development that you're seeing. A great win from Mohammad Mokaev, by far his best in the UFC. This was by far the best he looked There was just a lot more authority being exerted by him, and I really appreciated that. Okay, Trevor Peek versus Muhammad Yaya ended via unanimous decision for Peek. He gets 2 30-27s and 29-28. Muhammad Yaya sort of becoming the first Emiratis fighter in the UFC. This was not a great fight. I'm not going to really talk about it other than to say Yaya and Peek Yaya especially being graded on a curve. I think Peek is certainly good for a good time. He fought a much more intelligent fight relative to what he normally does, but I don't know if that made everyone happy because it made him a lot less dangerous. He usually just fights balls out, which again is a very questionable strategy, but for building your brand, it can be pretty good. Anyway, there's not much to say about this fight. It was not very good, not very memorable, and not really all that important. All right, Javid Basharat took on Victor Henry. This one ended in a no contest. There were 2 no contests on this card. This was the first of them via accidental groin kick at 15 seconds of round number 2. Javid Basharat, I'm very high on. I still am very high on. I've been high on him. The issue for him has been he's been very good and extremely well-rounded, but hasn't been able to necessarily put away everyone that you would want him to. Victor Henry, a very well-trained fighter, a very experienced fighter, a very tough fighter, a very good fighter. You thought, man, if he can put this guy away, that would be really, really impressive. And, of course, the first round was good, but you were getting a lot of what you would normally get from Basharat. By the way, I thought Victor Henry doing a good job to disrupt some of what Javid Basharat does really well. But by the second round, you began to see he began to take over, I think, in certain positions at times, or was just a little bit ahead when he needed to be. But none of that really matters in the end because there was a groin kick. Victor Henry doubles over in pain, writhing in agony, and the doctor goes to tell him after they looked at the replay, no, it actually didn't hit your testicles. And Victor Henry quite audibly tells him it hit everything, including the testicles. And later it was revealed backstage when the fight was ultimately declared a no contest, has to go backstage, is dry heaving, nearly vomiting. I think, in fact, was vomiting, and had to be taken to the hospital for testicular ultrasound. These angles at which they reviewed the kick don't make it all that conclusive. And I'm not telling you that there's some kind of mischief afoot. I'm just saying sometimes you get really great video angles of an illegal blow, and sometimes you don't. This was a case where you just didn't get one. So Javid Basharat took to social to be like, no, the guy didn't get hit there. You know, again, I think very highly of Javid. I just feel like he's very wrong. I don't think that you can really look at what happened to Victor Henry and the reaction he's given and then just say, well, these very obstructed video angles that indeed the obstructed ones are not very conclusive. We can be conclusive about that. I would just caution very much against that. I feel terrible for Victor Henry. I feel terrible for this process. More to the point, what on earth was the ringside physician doing? This is the same ringside physician who ended up calling a no contest. Well, obviously the ref calls it, but telling the ref that Johnny Walker couldn't continue in the Magomed Ankalaev fight. So both times this guy enters the octagon, he ends up causing the fight to be stopped. Now, I do think the situations are a little bit different. The one with Walker is a little bit murkier. We've been over that in some other places. This one is not very murky, man. I've never seen a outright accuse a fighter of malingering. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, where he's telling Victor Henry, no, it didn't hit you. It's not to say that in every time there's even a questionable strike that fighters will never pretend to be hurt. Of course, in any group, some people are going to take advantage of the rules. We just talked about how Tim Elliott had openly talked about something like this. Not so much with absorbing groin kicks, but in taking advantage of referees' lax penalization. So in every group of people, fighters, nuns, firemen, cops, judges, you name it, there's always going to be someone who's going to act in a corrupt and unethical way. But given the medical results that Henry has now suffered, I don't think you could at all conclude that. And just given the particular kind of agony he appeared to be in, a lot of times fighters who try to pretend they're not very good at it. I don't know for how you feel about it, but Victor Henry to me was very convincing. Very convincing. So I don't know what happened there. They said that the ringside physician was, new to the job or something, just didn't have a lot of experience. Fine. Obviously it's not going to be easy to potentially recruit someone from outside the country to fly to Abu Dhabi to be a ringside physician. I get that. I'm not sure what his story is, but this was not an effective way for this to go down. I mean, ultimately, maybe it should have been a no contest. I don't think that Basharat in any way intended to kick someone in the balls. But nevertheless, this look where the doctor is basically telling a clearly distressed fighter that he's making this up or that it's not real was just bizarre and awful. Didn't like it. I feel terrible for Victor Henry. Javid Basharat, certainly this doesn't really serve his interests either. What a nightmare. Total nightmare. Cedricus Duma defeated Abu Aitar 29-28 across the board. This was a really weird fight. Duma was able to get the takedown in the first round pretty easily and hold it. Seemed like in the second round he was really afraid to engage. It went at kickboxing range the whole time, and Aitar would kind of flurry in response. And then in the third round, the jab really was much more pronounced for Duma. He got it pumping. I would have liked to have seen that a little bit earlier. He is lanky. I know he's been relatively active, so I don't know exactly how much prep time he had for this whole thing, but just a fight that took place. I mean, I think Duma has some skills, to be clear. Here's another case where Abu Aitar grabbed, again, intentionally or not, I don't know, but very clearly grabbed the hair of Duma and pulled it. Like, not just grabbed a fistful, but you can see him, like, maneuvering it. It's like, guys, how are we not taking a point for that? Oh, I don't want to affect the natural course. Guys, somebody did just affect the natural course. Once you commit a foul, you have affected the natural course, intentionally or otherwise. Intervene. Take a point. Like, make this count for something. Otherwise, what the hell are we doing? All right. Mike Breeden defeats Anshul Juble. Anshul Juble was the Road to UFC Season 1 lightweight tournament winner and looked good through the first 2 rounds. He gets KO'd at the 3rd minute of round number 3. So for 2 rounds, he looked pretty good. He was, sticking and moving. He was doing what he needed to do. Looked fine, was more active. Breeden missed weight, as I mentioned, 159.5 he came in. This was a guy who had been on a losing streak. He was just basically getting outstruck. But as the fight wore on, you could see Breeden, engaging a little bit more trash talk, getting more confidence, doing the kinds of things he needed to do. And then in the 3rd round, he comes out and he's literally barking at him, yelling at him, screaming at him, chanting USA. But I want to go back to it, barking at him. And Juble, I think, who was tiring perhaps more naturally, just fell apart. And froze. And Breeden just overwhelmed him. I've seen guys, kind of collapse in cardio. Shane Carwin had some moments like that. But this seemed to be more like psychological than physiological. And I don't know that I've seen someone collapse in a visible way that much. Now, obviously, these guys, in the case of Juble, has less than 10 pro fights. You need to have some measure of understanding how green he is. And he's part of a development project for a different part of the world as well. But that was that was just complete collapse. He just imploded, and Mike Breeden gets the win. So, that felt like a very BKFC win where it's not so much who the more skilled guy is, but the bigger dog in him. And Mike Breeden's got some dog in him. He did really well. He did really well down the stretch. Totally psyched out his opponent. Okay, which takes us to Mohammad Mokaev defeating Nathaniel Wood 29-28. What the fuck happened here, man? Nathaniel Wood kicked in the balls twice. Mokaev clearly grabbing a glove and the fence. Not a point taken. I'm not saying that Mokaev didn't do things that made him a better fighter than Nathaniel Wood in this fight. He is skilled, but he committed an insane array of fouls. And Nathaniel Wood, in my judgment, should be entitled to a draw because Mokaev should have had at least 1 point deducted. I'm not saying these fouls are intentional. I'm saying that they happened. And you can't let them happen. Even, guys, this whole thing about intentional or not intentional, to me, you can have an unintentional foul that's still a function of negligence. And if your unintentional foul is a function of negligence, you should have a point taken. You don't get to 4 fouls, even if they're all unintentional, if you're minding your P's and Q's as a professional. Come on, man. What the fuck are we doing here? I can't believe... Nathaniel Wood, in my mind, I don't know that the commission... By the way, I'm not even sure what commission was responsible for this. I don't think it'll matter anyway. But Nathaniel Wood is absolutely entitled to this result being overturned. In terms of like what would be the ethical and appropriate thing to do, you can't do that to a guy, intentional or otherwise, and say that that's a win that should go on your record. I just don't believe that. At a bare minimum, this should be a draw. Bare minimum, Nathaniel Wood should have a draw. He had a nice, he does this kind of trip takedown where he collects the leg and then turns them and drops them. I mean, Nathaniel Wood did some great things. Naimov did some great things in this fight as well. But like the whole thing is marred by the fact that there were two ball kicks, a glove grab, and a fence grab by Naimov. And then, to top it all off, he indicates he was fighting with staph infection after the fact. This whole card was just the most bizarre thing that ever happened. This commission, I mean, I understand that if a fighter doesn't tell a doctor what's actually wrong with them, how is the doctor supposed to know unless it's like quite visibly obvious? Like you can actually conceal, like if you go to the ER and the doctor has to play a guessing game with what's wrong with you, yeah, if blood is shooting out of your eyeballs, he may or may not have a guess, he or she. But if if you visibly look okay and they're just kind of not telling you anything, what are you supposed to do? It's hard. It's very difficult. So, the whole thing is just a fucking calamity. All right, which now takes us to Victoria Dudakova defeating Jinyu Fry. 29-28 across the board. No issue there. A couple times Dudakova got a little bit close to a armbar, but not really. I thought she did the much better work on the feet in the first round. Fry, I thought, came back in the second round. And then in the third round, Dudakova took over again, rocking her, by the way, the end of the first, and then I think picking it back up on some of the striking in the third. So the scoring is fair. That's fine. But Dudakova missed weight by 0.6, and then she indicates that she has staph in a place that she can't even tell the audience about. So now that's two fighters who admitted to having staph on this card. But we're not done, ladies and gentlemen. How about Sharabutdin Magomedov defeating Bruno Silva on this card? I want to go back to something. I believe it was Dudakova, Naimov, and I think it was Breeden as well. Those are three fighters now. I may have forgot to mention this when we were talking about Breeden, who admitted they had staph on the card. So let's go through this here for just a second if we can. Not even get into some of the issue with some of the scoring that happened over the course of time. Dudakova, staph. Naimov, staph. Breeden, staph. Then above that, Duma, Aitar, clear hair grabbing. Basharat, Victor Henry. Do we need to go back to that? Trevor Peek versus Yaya. No controversy, but, not a fight that probably should have happened at the UFC level. And then Mohammad Mokaev versus Tim Elliott. You get over the fact that anything happened to Mokaev because he won via submission, but he got hit with a when he was downed there as well. Now, of course, I've been over this on the regular post-fight show. I think that the unified rules need to be deeply amended. I think that they suck. But okay, you get the idea. So let's talk about Sharabutdin. Okay, a lot to like. He wins 30-27 across the board. Don't agree with that. I thought it was 29-28. I thought Bruno won the third. I know that the third round was close, so I don't think 30-27 is incomprehensible. And I know what some of you are saying right now. Aha, but Luke, he did more damage. That's very debatable. There were a lot of big strikes that Bruno Silva landed in this contest, especially that he won the first two rounds. And then there was a standing to all-the-way ground shot that he landed coming down with it. Now, to his credit, Magomedov took it well, but this is the point I wanted to make, and it's something I'm having a discussion with folks in the know, which is, tell me how grappling is not scored like defense. Remember, what is the reward for defense in the unified rules? The reward is nothing other than whatever benefits defense confers, right? So if you defend a takedown, they don't rate that for you. You don't get anything from that from the judges, but you, in that real scenario, aren't on the ground. So the benefit is just whatever you've done with the defense, but they don't count that affirmatively towards your scoring. That's not how one does it. One actually affirmatively scores your takedown defense or your defense in this case. So just want to be very clear about that a fight like this to me is like a perfect example of a situation where grappling no longer has any value. Like you just changed the equation from standing to ground, and it can't be the case that the only value of grappling is the same value as defense. In fact, we know that's not true because that's not how it's written into the rules. And I know what you might say, well, there is effective grappling. Like if you're threatening submissions or you've moved to a dominant position and you can land ground and pound or whatever, that's the benefit there. But again, you're not even grading the grappling at that point. You're just grading the end result of the grappling. Grappling has turned into defense. It is not graded. Whatever benefit you get is just from whatever you can reasonably pull off. There's nothing added to that unless you get a case where someone's grappling and they're not doing a whole lot, but you can see this accumulative effect. I'm just pointing out, I don't think that what Bruno Silva was doing was, super hardcore, excellent grappling, but he put Magomedov on his back in the third. Magomedov elected to fight from there, which makes him a much more diminished fighter. I do think it's highly debatable about who landed more damage overall in that round. To me, you can score that 29-28, and I think if you have any value of grappling beyond that it's defense, which again is not how it's supposed to be scored in the rules, then I think you have to give him round 3. Wouldn't matter because the right guy won. So the good part about Magomedov, because he did win the first 2 rounds, I mean, his kicking game is as dynamic as they get. He is all over the place with it. He can put it anywhere. He's got different ways he can spin into it. He can not telegraph it at all. His leg kicking game is dynamic as shit. He can go linear. He can go round. He can go high. He can go low. He can go spin. He can go, you name it. He really has a very, very, very dynamic kicking game, and it was chewing up Bruno Silva for as long as the fight was on the feet. It was chewing him up. So that was really interesting. But Bullet's takedown defense, not great, right? He doesn't have a lot of great down blocking. He doesn't have a great sprawl. He kind of leaps into position at times. That was a real problem. On the feet, he looked fine. And off of his back, he didn't look helpless. I think we should say that, right? He didn't. It wasn't like Bruno was going for hardcore guard passing. There was one time where he did, and he got passed, but it wasn't like he was really trying, so I don't really know exactly how good Magomedov's guard retention is. But, he was attacking from his back. I admit he was making it a fight from his back. No doubt about it. There was other times he'd been taken down in the fight and also fought off his back, and I thought he won. I think maybe in the second round, So it's not. I'm not immune to the idea that you can win off of your back just via striking. Of course you can. I just don't think he did in the third. But certainly in the first 2 rounds, he just did overall much more damage. I fully agree with that. Again, right guy won. But you could hear the commentators kind of saying there should be a little bit more to his get-up game than there was. Electing to fight off your back like that, again, it worked out for Magomedov. Whether you scored the third round for him or not, whatever, it did work out for him in the end. But you can't really say that's the most effective way for him to be spending his time fighting. It's not, right? Now, relentlessly defending the takedown is not either. At some point, going to your back and then just kind of trying to slug it out from there with elbows on some level might make some sense in certain conditions, but you at least would want to have the option. If you can get good takedown defense and good separation, you would want to have that option because on the feet, he was chewing up Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva did have a couple of interesting moments in the first round, especially towards the end, with these kind of really stepping, jousting jabs, linear shots, right? Because a lot of the stuff that Magomedov was throwing was hooking. So he would come through, and then as he would step into position, he would really drive back on him. And that was kind of nice. He just couldn't keep it up. The leg kicking game was tearing him to pieces. So a lot of really good stuff from Sharabutdin, but and a middleweight, all of a sudden, all these great contenders. Here comes Bo Nickel. Here comes Sharabutdin. Here comes Dricus Duplessis and Hamzat Chimaev. And, I mean, you can go down the list. Ikram Aliskerov. All of a sudden, middleweight has this, new crop of really interesting guys at various levels, but on the way. So I like what we saw from him, but he doesn't appear. His grappling needs some work. It definitely needs some work. So what a weird ass card, huh? What a weird card. What a weird preliminary card. A very forgettable one. A very bad one in certain ways. Some highlights. Some good spots. Some people stood up. Mokaev had a good win. Magomedov had a good win. There were some moments. But yeesh, that was a weird one. A weird one. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thumbs up on the video, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. Tomorrow, in studio, Morning Combat, we're going to react to everything and then more. So we appreciate you guys watching, and until next time, enjoy the fights.